It's 9:04 on Wednesday, February the 23rd. The House Criminal Justice Subcommittee is now in session. Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
Representatives Beck, Curcio, Farmer, Griffey, Hardaway, Howell, Lamberth, Moody, Russell, Sexton, Chairman Doggett.
Present.
Chairman Doggett, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Members, any personal orders before we begin the day? Seeing none, we'll go to our Sergeant of Arms, Mr. Tyler Muniz, for words of wisdom.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mr. Muniz, a constituent of the 45th District. Today's words of wisdom are always do what's right, even when no one is around. I shared this with my wife, and she further stated that it is because God is always around and he is always watching. Those are the words of wisdom for today.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Muniz. Members, last week there was a little bit of confusion about the committee times that we had. I know that one of the first weeks that we had, we stopped at 10:30. I verified with the clerk's office that we are in fact here in this room until 11 o'clock. And so that is our intent, to work through our calendar today and right up to 11 o'clock. I know that members have other committees that they'll have to be on and presenting bills and other committees. So for those that are here as our guests today, if you notice a member leaving the room, it's because they most likely have other committees in which they are going to be presenting legislation in. Before we go through the calendar, I want to go ahead and take care of a few things. If you'll notice, item number 2, House Bill 2440 by Chairman Farmer will be rolled 2 weeks. Item number 5, House Bill 2319 by Representative Hall will be rolled 1 week. Item number 12, House Bill 2830 by Chairman Littleton is off notice. Item number 20, House Bill 2620 by Representative Harris, rolled 2 weeks. And that brings us back to item number 1, House Bill 2034 by Representative Harris. You are recognized on your bill. There's an amendment, code 13511. Do you wish to proceed with that amendment?
Yes, Chairman.
You are recognized on that amendment.
All right. So on this bill, House Bill 2034, we did add an amendment to this bill to clarify and update and make some changes that were mentioned during 2 weeks ago, during committee 2 weeks ago. Some of those changes to be made were we added shade as a category, shade from direct sunlight, section 2. We added a chain as a restraint that is not to be used. We changed portable water to clean water, and we changed the Class C misdemeanor to a Class B misdemeanor, the Class B misdemeanor to a Class A misdemeanor, and we're able to address every issue that were mentioned 2 weeks ago, so I'm hoping that we can add this amendment to the bill.
Thank you. Does the amendment make the bill?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
On the amendment, any questions for the sponsor? Question's been called on the amendment. Without objection, we're now voting on adding the amendment code 13511 onto House Bill 2034. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Ayes prevail. You adopt. We are back on the bill as amended. I do have a couple questions that I can say for the end, but if any other members have questions for the sponsor on this legislation. Representative Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Harris, I just want to thank you for bringing this. I've had so many people reach out, and this is such an important bill to protect our pets and thank you for bringing it. My daughter is one of your greatest advocates on this bill, and so many people. And again, thank you for bringing this.
Thank you.
Any other members have questions for the sponsor on the bill as amended? I do, Mr. Sponsor, have a question. This amendment that you had previously, I know that there were some issues that Representative from Sumner County had brought up to you. And I know you went back and watched the video and made some changes. But in those changes, some items were taken out that I thought were very pertinent to this bill. One of those was an agricultural exemption to the bill. Another was a camping exemption. Also takes the time limit of 3 hours for like a working dog to be in the back of a pickup truck. Takes that exemption out as well, and also removes the hunting exemptions for these dogs. Was that your intent to remove all of those as well?
Chairman, the exemption for the 3 hours in the truck bed is still in the amendment. That's part 3 under section G on page 3. A dog left unattended in an open air truck bed for less than 3 hours when necessary for the owner to complete a temporary task that requires the dog to be left unattended in the truck bed is still in the amendment.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. It used to be open, and then you put a 3-hour time limit on that. Is that correct?
Yes, per the video, after watching committee twice, it was a concern that was brought up, and that has been addressed inside of this amendment.
Okay, the other concerns that I raised about the
agricultural,
the hunting, and the camping exemptions.
Yes, after speaking with a couple members as well as watching the video a couple times, they found that piece to be unnecessary or not needed as a part of this bill. And so that was removed as it didn't have any bearings as to the dog restraints request.
To me, those were 3 things that I thought were very necessary for that. So I'm not going to be supporting this bill because I believe that those exemptions should have remained with the bill. So I just want to make that clear that I'm not going to be supporting this one. Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the sponsor, are those exemptions critical to the purpose of the bill? Are those exemptions something that can allow you to move the bill forward without the exemptions and work with the chairman on how to achieve the same purposes at some later date?
Yeah, so thank you so much for that question. And so the parts that were taken out were the use of a restraint on a dog while the owner or the dog engaged in conduct directly related to the restriction to the business of cultivating agricultural products. And so that was added in there initially so that it would allow for a dog to be chained up while a farmer was feeding their chickens or herding their chickens or herding cows. So that piece was added in there and was deleted out because the restraints definition was also already in the bill on page 1. I'm more than willing to work with the chair after today's committee before it goes through the full committee to add an amendment if necessary. But it was taken out because after speaking with a couple of our committee members, it seemed to be an unnecessary piece that did not stick to the actual reason of the bill.
All right. May I suggest, and Mr. Chairman, I would need to ask you what the status of the bill is in terms of roles.
Stand by and I'll get that for you.
Thank you.
He actually has one more role. One more calendar, I should say.
To the sponsor, the chairman, like myself and most of the members, if not all, believe in making bills better as opposed to killing bills. So I would ask that you would consider a role and that the committee would grant the request so that you can get with the chairman. I'll work with you also to make this a better bill and to be able to move it forward at the next meeting. That is a motion.
All right, that motion and second has been done. Any objection? Seeing none, we'll roll 1 week.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee.
Next item on our calendar, number 3, House Bill 1321 by Representative Hardaway. You are recognized. I think the amendment's already been adopted previously. Thank you. Representative Hardaway, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 1321, as amended, speaks to reckless endangerment and how to hopefully deter some of the reckless endangerment that our criminal gang activity is causing in the communities these days. The bill as amended does not address all of what we've been discussing among some of the committee members as community terrorism. Terrorism, as defined on the national and international stages, is about using intimidation to instill fear in the populace, to gain control over a geographical area. This is what criminal gangs do. This is what we have got to resist, and we've got to do it in a way that we unmistakably deter these folk from intimidating and instilling fear in our communities. We'll be back with more, Mr. Chairman, to add to this piece, but this will open the door and we'll get started on addressing community terrorism in our state of Tennessee. Mr. Chairman, pending any questions from the committee, we have a family, the son, the brother, the grandson, the nephew of members of my community who have traveled here today to share their personal tragedy with the committee. Their son, their grandson, their nephew, brother was killed by a random bullet while he was opening Christmas presents on Christmas morning in his own home, in the safety and protection of his own home on Christmas morning, doing what 12-year-olds are supposed to be doing on Christmas morning. This young man was also a leader, an old soul, so to speak, in his ability to communicate and the leadership that he showed among his peers. He has communicated with the governor in the past, which is one of the ways that he was brought to my attention. And we never dreamed, the family never dreamed, that they would be here as part of that unfortunate fraternity of parents, grandparents who have lost and buried a child. Mr. Chairman, I would ask, pending any questions for myself from the committee members, that we would go out of session and allow the family of Artemis Rayford to offer testimony to the Criminal Justice Subcommittee.
Thank you, Representative. We will get to that in just a moment. Is there any questions for our sponsor? Chairman Farmer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. To Representative Hardaway, would this revocation, would this be throughout the entire period of the probationary period? Because it could be up to 6 years plus. Just kind of curious just how that's going to work with trying to get back and forth to work and pay fines and costs and community service and things like that.
Thank you for the question, sir. And we do have built in to the language the ability to petition the court for exceptions for that, whether it's work or school or religious reasons.
And thank you. That answers my question.
Thank you.
All right, members, without objection, we're going to go out of session. We're going to hear from Miss Angie Brooks and Miss Joyce Newton, if they're in the room with us. You're welcome to stand at the podium, or you can sit at these chairs. It's your choice. Okay. If you would introduce yourself for the record, you'll have 4 minutes for your comments, and then we will have time for members of the committee to ask questions if they have any.
Okay. My name is Joyce Newsom. Artemis Rayford with my grandson. And with this law, I think it's a good law because 9 times out of 10, it's not the people that committing these crimes. It's the innocent people that are one that's being hurt. They is putting reproach upon their parents, grandparents, uncles and aunts. And when they get out, most of the time, they commit the same crimes. So I think that this law will be a good law to help those who've been hurting for something that a member of your family may do, because when they do these crimes, they're not hurting themselves, they're hurting their families, and that's on both sides. Thank you.
Thank you. Any members have questions for our guest? Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you, ma'am.
Good morning.
First, I offer my condolences,
Thank you.
of course, and from myself and my colleagues, and certainly from the people of the state of Tennessee. Would you share with us how the loss of your grandson has impacted your day-to-day life? What's different?
Well, his siblings, he was the knee baby of 9 kids. They haven't been able to stay in the house. He had a little sister under him that was 8, devastated. She can't even sleep at night. And it's called hardship for his mom. All of them is with me now because they can't seem to stay in their house. They can't cope with the problem. And she is having counsel, but she's kind of like drinking more. Every night, if she don't maybe drink a beer to put herself to sleep, then she wake up through nights crying. So it's really a turmoil on the family.
In other words, that bullet has done more damage than just taking your grandson away physically.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for my daughter part, when Sean, that's what we call him, when he got shot that night, only thing he knew to do was to run to his mom. So that is going to be something that's going to be with her for the rest of her life. And he died in her arms. And it was so sad because she keeps saying, my baby came to me, but it was nothing I could do. With nothing she could do.
Well, you know, I thank you for having the courage and strength to want to move ahead with memorializing your grandson by putting in place public policy that will hopefully keep us from having to have these type of hearings again. Public policy that would deter this type of crime where innocent victims in this protection and safety of their own homes are killed. Had nothing to do with what he was doing. He was, tell us what he was doing.
He was in his living room playing a game. That's all he wanted was for Christmas for his mama to get him a game. And that's what she did, and he was up playing the game. Only one up, playing the game, because that's what he wanted for Christmas. And didn't know that was going to be the first time and the last time that he played that game.
Okay, thank you, ma'am, once again for what you've displayed and what you've offered to help the committee in assessing this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Leader Lamberth?
Okay. Ma'am, you don't have to come back to the mic. I just wanted to say I'm so sorry about your loss. Many of us on this committee have children roughly that age, and we can't imagine what your family's going through. But I will say I commend Representative Hardaway, and the entire time I've known him down here, he's fought for bills to try to combat violent crime, and so that folks in every neighborhood throughout Tennessee would not have to go through what you are going through, because I can virtually guarantee you that wasn't the first time that criminal had sprayed a bullet out through a neighborhood. Unfortunately, it happens over and over and over again. And so there's several bills this year to try to address that. But I just want you to know that, you know, we're going to be working on this long after you leave this committee and trying to at least get some tools out there to keep your neighborhood and every neighborhood safe. And so I just thank you and know that your words today matter. And it's something that all of us can carry with us as we deliberate these bills and try to enact them into law. So I just wanted you to know that. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Any other members? Ma'am, you'll have 4 minutes if you want to introduce yourself for the record.
Hi, my name is Angie Brooks. I am Artemis Rayford's aunt. I'm here today hoping that we can come to a conclusion to up the gun laws in our city. I went strictly by the book to get my gun license, but you have people don't have to have license to carry a gun. Please make it make sense to me. I just don't understand. Everybody needs a license to do business. You have to have license to hunt, do hair, and cut hair. Everything you do now, you basically have to have license. We are losing our young ones in the streets and also on the streets. These babies cannot watch TV or play in their homes safely where they belong. Please hear my cry. My nephew was gunned down. He didn't make it, but please, with his letter, we can save the next child. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you. This is Artemis's aunt, and she has been the key to us getting organized for the family to be able to offer the testimony to the committee. So I want to thank you for that extra effort that you've had to put out in spite of the mourning period that you find yourself in. Would you be kind enough to share with the committee your relationship with Artemis and what his loss has done to impact you?
Well, Artemis like my mom said, we called him Sean. He was the life of the party. They just left my home. We did a Christmas thing at my house, like pajamas night. He danced, he sang, he did everything. But just won't believe it, a million years that would have been the last time that we saw our teammates.
And he was active with his peers at school in participating in programs to combat street violence.
He played football. He did a lot. And me, Sean, we argued up and down because I thought he was 9, but he kept saying, Auntie, I'm 12. How you going to tell me I'm 9? But he wanted a pool party for his birthday. He would have been 13, May the 31st.
Well, I thank you again for what you've done to keep his memory alive and to make as much as possible and as difficult as it is to make something positive out of the most tragic occurrence in any parent's life, and that's having to bury a child. It just is unnatural. Okay? But I thank you for what you've done, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Any other members have questions or comments? Seeing none. Thank you, ladies, for your time being with us today and for your testimony. We appreciate you being here with us. There's nothing else. We're going to go back into session. Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to make sure that we understand that this bill as amended addresses the issues around licensure for driver's license for those who have chosen to abuse that privilege by participating in drive-by shootings and using their vehicles and that license for reckless endangerment. And we'll have, I spoke at length on community terrorism. However, that is an area of the law that we'll be addressing through other bills, but it's a conglomerate or a collection of legislative initiatives by myself and others that will make this happen. So I want to make sure I get that clear. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Any members' questions or comments to the sponsor? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none, we're now voting on sending House Bill 1321 as amended on the full criminal. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, the ayes prevail. You move on to full criminal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Next item, House Bill 2177 by Representative Ramsey. You're recognized. There's an amendment 13736. Is that one you wish to proceed with?
Yes. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an administration bill from the Department of Mental Health.
We'll need a motion and a second on this amendment before we proceed. Now we're in the proper posture. You may proceed.
Okay. Thank you, sir. And thank you for the moving and seconding. This bill comes to us from Tennessee's Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. What it does is addresses the escalation of opioid abuse and fatal drug overdoses in the U.S. and consequently in the state of Tennessee. The legislation was proposed by the Department's Statewide Planning and Policy Council. In 2020, the state of Tennessee had a total of 3,032 drug overdose deaths. Of those, 60% were related to some sort of involvement with fentanyl that was inadvertently or purposely added to the drug contents. And we have to know that it's estimated that there are 10 overdoses for every one that's fatal. So the number of overdoses is huge, as well as those that are fatal. Fentanyl has been found in counterfeit prescription pills, illicit opioids, and stimulants. It's cheap and expands their effect. And what this bill would do is exempt fentanyl test strips from the definition of drug paraphernalia in Tennessee. The fentanyl test strips are an inexpensive harm reduction that's been demonstrated to improve two things: overdose harm and reduction, and it also improves overdose risk behavior, which leads people that experience it or find it in their drug cache to threaten them to the point that they try to make some sort of other behavior decisions. This legislation will allow Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services to and other organizations to purchase and distribute the fentanyl test strips to people who are at risk for drug overdose. The aim is to engage individuals in recovery and certainly reduce the overdoses in Tennessee. The bill has no fiscal impact. However, overdose deaths have a staggering impact to the nation as well as state of Tennessee. In 2017, fatal overdoses cost the U.S. $550 billion in lost productivity in health care. We had some issues with the fentanyl strips. A fentanyl strip is cost about $1 a piece. They are available from biomed companies in Canada. They use the same technology as pregnancy test. You administer the strip to some portion of a drug that you're going to ingest or inject or whatever, and in 2.5 minutes you can read the results. The fentanyl strips also test for 10 analogs of fentanyl. They're 85 to 95% effective, and it's something that what concerns were brought to us from TBI, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. They had issues with law enforcement confusion in charging for criminal action surrounding drug and paraphernalia possession. And so that resulted in the amendment that you have before you, which you have placed on the bill. The amendment does two things. It accepts to paraphernalia definition and will not apply to any charges which consider or have in them the offense of manufacturing, distributing, or selling controlled substances. There will be a 3-year sunset added by this amendment to the bill so the department can collect data to use in future efforts in testing with fentanyl strips. With that explanation, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions and renew Chairman Curcio's motion.
Well, thank you for that explanation, and I will, if the committee doesn't mind, I'm going to take a point of personal privilege here. I have in the room here a couple of my district's finest from the Highway Patrol in the back of the room there. Glad to have you here, and thank you for your service to our communities and our state. Chairman Curcio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to thank you for bringing this bill. I wish it wasn't necessary, but I think this is probably one of the most important bills that we'll pass this year. I have a very robust drug and alcohol treatment community in my district over in Dixon County, and I was meeting with one of the owners of one of those facilities last week, and he said, we'll often admit a young man for he thinks he's there for alcohol, marijuana, maybe cocaine. And they'll give him a drug test upon entering their facility, and the young man will be surprised to find out that he tests positive for fentanyl and a whole host of other drugs that he never intended to take. I mean, he knew he was taking other illegal drugs and shouldn't have been doing it, but found themselves in the grips of addiction. And many of these folks that are brought in are surprised to hear that they're testing positive for these very, very dangerous synthetic opioids. And that's not their intent. They have a problem and they're trying to get help. And unfortunately, many of these folks, when they relapse, they do die because either their tolerance has changed or they've gotten into, some street drugs that have fentanyl laced into them. And so, like I said, I wish this wasn't necessary, but I think this is a smart approach. I think it's a conservative approach for these drug users to at least be able to be fully informed about what is in that drug. And then hopefully they can come forward and get help, and we can divert them into a mental health or substance abuse program before they harm themselves or commit a crime or do something that becomes a criminal activity. So I just want to thank you for this, and really, really glad to see that we're doing this as a state.
Any other questions for the sponsor on the amendment? Representative Beck?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the sponsor, this is a fantastic bill. It will save lives, and I thank you for bringing it. But my question to you is, law enforcement has informed me that there's a new drug out there that's even more powerful than fentanyl. Do you know if this will pick that up in the test strips? And I apologize, I should have written down the name of it. I can't remember it right now, but it's like 30 times more powerful than fentanyl, and I don't know if it's related to fentanyl. I don't know, but do you have any idea if it will show if that drug is in this? What it's testing?
My understanding is that this tests for 10 analogs. Each year we seem to have issues with just enough of a biochemical change in drugs to change the name of it. So we have to change our legislation, our codes to match that. I do not know the drug. I know that fentanyl was developed in the 60s. It probably has had plenty of chances to have analogs that we've never heard of yet. Up until probably the 2010, you could purchase fentanyl through the mail. It was used extensively in Afghanistan for pain control, for wound issues and stress, tranquilizer. So there have probably been lots of opportunities to expand on the biochemical compound. I don't know the drug that you're speaking of. Fentanyl's 50 to 100 times stronger than heroin, and so if this one's 30 times stronger than fentanyl, we got a real issue on our hands. And so if you want to get me the name, I'll be glad to check and see if in fact we can make that presentation to the full committee.
Thank you, sponsor, and I will look that up and get that to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I do have a question for you if no one else on the committee does on this amendment. Currently, it is considered drug paraphernalia to be in possession. There's a charge that you could receive for having possession of fentanyl testing strips. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. My understanding is that that right now drug paraphernalia has specific descriptions, specific definition, pipes. It can sometimes be rolling paper, pill cutters, syringes, pill crushers, mortar and pestle. All these things can be drug paraphernalia, and test strips are in that consideration. What this bill does, and if there's a charge of drug paraphernalia, my understanding is it's a Class A misdemeanor, and any of the defined, I guess, articles that I have mentioned can cause a charge of that. What this does is exempts test strips from paraphernalia. So if you're found with the test strips and no other charges that would indicate involvement in manufacturing, distributing, or selling controlled substance, this exception stays in place. If any of the other charges are assessed that I just mentioned, then the exception is eliminated. So I gather that the test strips will not be allowed or can be considered in the judicial discovery, I guess, of the charges if any of these other three issues are involved. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat. If so, correct me if I'm wrong. If someone is found to be in possession of an illegal drug and they have the test strip with them, they can be charged with drug paraphernalia at that juncture.
My understanding is yes. It's still depending on the intent and I guess the size of the amount. It's up to the charging officer to make that charge, but were it not to be involved with these three issues, you still would have the probability of exclusion from the drug paraphernalia description of the test strips. You would have the other charge with possession, but that would not include the test strips as paraphernalia, unless, excuse me, unless you were involved in these other three activities: manufacturing, selling. Do I need further? We got lots of folks here that are experts on this, and be glad to give over some time to whoever wants to address that. I hope but I guess the point of this bill is that there will be no charges if all you're found with is test strips. Otherwise, the typical and code definitions are in place. So if you have an infraction that includes any of these other issues, you will stand for charges. But if you have the test strips and nothing else that would indicate a potential charge, then it's not considered paraphernalia.
Thank you. But the purpose of moving this out of drug paraphernalia is to what? What's the purpose?
The purpose is to have in possession of people that are at risk, and even with the facilitation of state agencies, the purpose is to put this in possession of people at risk, so you can have, and the purpose is two effects: to reduce risk and to change behavior. So if we have these people that take a drug test and they say, hey, I didn't know that I was taking fentanyl, and it's so cheap and easy to get, it's used to kind of bulk up the prices of illicit drugs and extend the effect. So the hope is, and what it's been in other states, we have several other states that have passed this. There are 10 right now that have this same bill in consideration. And so we're hoping that if these people have possession of a test strip, their stash or whatever they're going to do test positive, and they didn't know it, that they're going to mend or alter their behavior in some way to either make life safer for them or the rest of us. And so that's really what the purpose is.
Thank you. I have a plethora of questions about this that continues to go further, but I have members on the committee that would like to ask questions as well. Representative Russell.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, sponsor, for bringing this legislation. Just to make sure I understand, this amendment would help with accidental overdoses with people to identify fentanyl.
Yes, sir. The way that you use the strips is whatever you're going to ingest or inject or rub on your eyeballs or whatever druggies do, I don't know. Whatever you're going to use, you dissolve in some liquid, put the test strip in it, and within 2 minutes it will tell you if fentanyl is present or not. And so that's that's kind of the point. And that's what the amendment does. That's what the bill did initially, but we changed this amendment so that law enforcement would not be confused about charges. And so that's the point of the bill as amended.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this is a big safety concern for all of Tennessee and probably the whole United States because fentanyl is one of the most deadliest drugs out there. Recently, we had 2 school resource officers that overdosed by accident at Sequoia High School, so I'll be proud to support the amendment and the bill. And can I make the motion to add the amendment?
You can. We do have others
Okay.
that are on to testify. Representative Farmer.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had, I believe some folks from the Department of Health came and saw me, talked to me about this bill. I think it's a great bill. I usually attend and have attended a DARE program over in Jefferson County each year. And there's a mother that comes out and talks about her daughter, I believe on her 18th birthday, right around graduating college, right around in there, who was out with some friends and they'd gotten a hold of some cannabis. And they were smoked it, and evidently it had been laced. A lot of folks overdose on this stuff, and they don't know, right? And it's something just as, a bad decision, right? And they ended up, she ended up smoking it, getting sick, and they left her in a room and scared to take her to the hospital. If they just took her to the hospital, she ended up dying, right? But those kids that just had the opportunity to have something to test this, and other folks, it'd save on overdoses, I think. And then folks go to the hospital, they rack up hospital bills and everything else, and whether they die or not, it's just, I think it's a good idea, and if they're found with some marijuana or they're found with some other drugs, they can still be charged for that. But at least give the people the opportunity to, if they're going to do something, make a bad decision, smoke marijuana, whatever else, just at least give them the opportunity to be as safe as they can about it. And we don't want people dying, right? We don't want people to use illegal drugs to begin with, but at the end of the day, we're here to save lives and help people save their lives, right, and their loved ones. So I think it's a good bill. I don't see anything wrong with it, and we're here to pass good policy and help folks live. So thank you for carrying this legislation.
Any other questions for a sponsor? Representative Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trying to digest all of this information and try to make it as concise as possible. So basically what your bill does, owning or having in your possession a fentanyl test strip would no longer be a criminal activity as long as you have no other paraphernalia with you.
Yes, sir.
Good. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, any objection to the question on the amendment? Seeing none, we're now voting on adding amendment number 13736 on the House Bill 2177. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, the ayes prevail. You adopt. We are now on the bill as amended. Question has been called. Any objection? Seeing none, we're now voting on sending House Bill 2177 as amended on the full criminal. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, the ayes prevail. You move on to full criminal.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Next item, House Bill 2415 by Representative Smith. You have a motion and a second. There's an amendment code 13885. Do you wish to proceed with that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the motion from Leader Lamberth.
You'll need a second on that amendment, and you have it. You're recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, committee, and thank you, Chairman. This bill, I just direct your attention to a section of the code 3917-308 and 3917-315. In current code, the crimes of harassment, stalking, and aggravated stalking are already codified with Class A misdemeanors as well as Class E felony for stalking if it involves a sexual predator. And what this particular bill does, it adds to that a minimum fine for $1,000 for harassment, $2,000 for stalking, and then $2,500 for aggravated stalking. And the final section of the bill, I've been working with DCS as well as our juvenile court justices to add a language in the bill relative to delinquent acts of juveniles, simply because within the definitions already in code, of harassment and stalking. It involves communication, and if you would bear with me, that means contacting a person in writing, print, telephone, wire, radio, electromagnetic, photoelectronic, photo-optical, electronic means, including text messages, facsimile transmission, electronic mail, instant messages, images, video, sound recordings, or intelligence, and also including social networks, social media, or websites. The purpose of this bill is really to address social media bullying. And in Hamilton County, there was a young lady who was forced to leave a middle school after she was swarmed by juveniles in a ladies' room, videotaped, and bullied subsequent to that. And so while many times it's difficult to prosecute and to find the appetite to prosecute when there are no fines, and at this point there's no specific code available that looks at just juvenile delinquency as it relates to this, and this particular bill gives very broad discretions to a juvenile court judge. It does place on the first offense a minimum hours of 12 hours community service, the subsequent offense 40 hours minimal community service, but that can be in addition to other decisions and sentencing with the judge's discretion. So at this point, Mr. Chairman, I think it might be best for me just to take questions, and I look forward to asking for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the sponsor on the amendment? Representative Beck.
Thank you, and thank you, sponsor, for bringing this. But my question to you is, do you think these fines, mandatory fines, you think that'll deter the behavior because we're getting at their pocketbook, or is this more for the prosecution being, the awareness being raised for the prosecution? Tell me exactly where you're going with this, please.
Both, actually. I think that when you have a crime of record, that it's a crime of record. When you have to make a payment back to the court, it does impact or does disincentivize that behavior as an adult, but it also brings forward the idea to our prosecutors, our district attorneys, to make sure that they understand that this is something that has been escalated in the view of the General Assembly and for the public good.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any objection to the question on the amendment? Seeing none, we're now voting to add Amendment Code 13885 on the House Bill 2415. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, the ayes prevail. We adopt. We're now on House Bill 2415 as amended.
I would just thank the committee for all your patience. I want to thank Leader Lambert for helping me make this a better bill. And I do think that since we have, in talking to juvenile court judges, social media and bullying is one of the more contributing factors to teen suicide in our culture today. And I think that this gives us an opportunity to stand behind our prosecutors and equip parents to understand that we do intentionally want good social media use and good communication, but there is a line of inappropriateness. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any objection to the question? Seeing none, we're now voting to send House Bill 2415 as amended on the full criminal. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, the ayes prevail. You move on to full criminal.
Thank you, committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Item number 7, House Bill 1830, Representative Lamar. You have a motion and a second. You recognize there is an amendment 14002. Do you wish to proceed with that amendment?
Give me just a second. Sorry, I'm struggling a little bit today. So I have so much more respect for those who have disabilities. It is not an easy task, but I'm thankful I'm able to volunteer and bring more awareness. But thank you. I have amendment that is, I explained last week what this bill was. It is a multi-agency approach to.
I'm sorry, excuse me, Amendment 14002?
Yes, sir.
You're recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What this amendment does is creates a multi-agency approach to reducing gun violence in our community. We had a very long and engaging discussion last week, and I won't make you all go through that again. But what I did with this amendment is take much of the concerns and the recommendations from you all on this committee to make this bill better, but keep the same spirit of the bill, which is to, again, reiterate, this is not a bill to try to take away guns from lawful gun owners. But what we're trying to do is encourage the Department of Health, Department of Labor and Workforce, and Department of Education to join us in preventative measures to reduce gun violence in our community. What that looks like is law enforcement has a lot of tasks on their hands. They are burdened with a lot. And we want to make sure we're bringing other agency in to alleviate many of the responsibilities they have when it comes to gun crime. So what this will do is give hospitals capacity to intervene, youth intervention and conflict resolution training with the Department of Education, and also the TBI providing data to the Department of Health to make recommendations on how to best tackle gun violence issues and prevention in our community. Again, I took out the suggestions and any of those concerns y'all had at first, and I'm open for questions on the amendment.
Thank you for that explanation. Any questions for the sponsor on the amendment? Seeing none, we're now ready to vote on adding Amendment Code 14002 on the House Bill 1830. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, the ayes prevailed. You adopt. We're on House Bill 1830 as amended. Leader Lambert.
Thank you, and thank you for changing the language around. It's definitely better language. Here's one thing I'm still wondering about. I mean, so it's a resolution that apparently asks different departments in state government that are already doing much of this work to work together. I mean, that's something we've all discussed with them, and to make sure departments of state government are not siloed already, and is an ongoing conversation to ensure that everybody's sharing data with each other and all of that. But the actual bill appears to do just that. I mean, is that your goal, just to ensure to kind of break down some of those silos and just make sure they're all talking with one another?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is the process to get the conversation started and allow them to open the door to work together in preventative ways to attack gun violence issues. So they are working in silos right now. Nobody's really working together. And so we're trying to use existing resources to create opportunities for us to work together to prevent gun violence in our community. Because everybody's working in silos, and law enforcement gets much of the brunt of the responsibility to do this work. But we all can join in together and to attack gun violence issues. I mean, I talked about the story of Mr. Rayford last week in my testimony. You heard the testimony for this family and many other issues. Yesterday, my friend sent me a story in Memphis. A 4-year-old was shot. And I think that what we want to do is ensure that we are creating a conversation, pushing the issue, and this is a great way to do that.
And my only, I guess, response to that would be is I would disagree that currently folks are working in silos. And I can only say for the last specifically 3 or 4 years, this has been a conversation. I mean, I've talked to multiple different commissioners about this. I've talked to the governor regularly about this. I mean, this is something that we've all been pushing, yourself included. And I'm not supportive of the implication that somehow these departments have not been working together. Can they do better? Absolutely. Fully support that and fully support the effort that all of them should. But I do have some reservations that there's an implication here that somehow or another these departments have not been working well together. And look, this is something that every single department in state government, every single Tennessean, should be working together to try to resolve violent crime issues in any neighborhood. But that just wanted to share that reservation that, I know these departments, I know these folks that are working hard in TBI and the Department of Safety and mental health, and they're all striving very hard and have been for years to try to address these issues. Just wanted to share that.
And my apologies if you are saying that I don't think that they're working hard at care. That's not what I'm trying to say. In all the departments that are mentioned, I've had conversations with them to all help me get this bill correct. So we are all on the same page that we want to continue doing something, and they have all given me the okay and given their opinions on how this bill can be as best as possible as we've seen in this amendment. But I've talked to all of the departments listed, and they are on board with what we're doing, and it's wanted to further the work, further the conversation, because again, gun violence is a really serious issue. We are 14th in the nation for gun violence issues, and I'm just trying to do something about it with this bill and bring everybody on board. And this is my way of trying to further the conversation and work in a bipartisan manner to get it done, and even amending it so that our committee members be okay with it, folks on both sides of the aisle can be okay with it, our departments can be okay with it. And so we're just trying to start the conversation, because what's going on in my city and many cities around the state is a travesty, and we really need this support in furthering the work with many of the departments around gun violence prevention.
Thank you. Representative Griffey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative, for bringing this legislation. I share your concern and passion about trying to do something to address the senseless and needless loss of life in a number of our communities. And my biggest concern, or I guess focus, is I believe more than anything it's driven by drug use, drug trade, and that's what, and extreme poverty too. And I noticed that there's a 668,000 state expenditure physical note on this, and 652 in subsequent years. And it's been also my experience throughout life that government and government agencies are generally, and this is a big generalization, are not the best suited entities, just because of the way they function, to try to address a specific problem. And what I would suggest is we take that $668,000 in 2 or 3 years basis, and let's form a task force, whichever member, and I don't know who it is, who's ever got the most murders in their district. Let's take that money and let's focus it on that district as a pilot program. And let's have that representative and the senator for that district work with the DA, the sheriff in that district, somebody from the governor's or TBI or the governor's force, let the speaker appoint. Let's do a dedicated ad hoc task force to, let's focus on one district. Let's focus all of it, put all of our efforts in a single point and focus on that. And see if we can make some progress. And then if we can, we could take the lessons that we've learned from that and hopefully apply to other districts where we're seeing how they, because I think if we do one of these big, broad, sweeping plans to try to get multiple agencies involved, and I'm afraid the mission is going to get lost with all the different players. And having one person accountable to be responsible for what happens, I think whoever that person is that gets appointed to do that, they're not going to want to publicly fail or mess up. So it puts a lot of pressure to try to get something accomplished. So that would be my suggestion. And I don't know if you want to comment on that, but I've got a follow-up motion after that.
Thank you for your comments. Actually, this bill costs nothing. If you pull up your iPad and look at the research note for the bill as amended, it's not significant. It cost us not a dime, $0 in order to get this bill passed and be able to create a multi-agency approach to this gun violence issue. Again, law enforcement is on the back end. They get called once something bad already happens. This is an opportunity for us to get the conversation started and put in opportunities for us to do something before bad things happen. You know, so I just want to emphasize, like, it's not costing us anything to do this, not a dime.
Thank you, Representative Griffey. I've got some others on the list that would like to speak. Representative Sexton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And of course, I think anybody in this room would appreciate the fact that we're trying to do our communities a service by making them safer in whatever way that we can. I have to be honest in my concerns about this bill, and it's peppered throughout using the term gun violence. It could have been stated community violence, and then list, a whole list of things: guns, drugs, knives, whatever the case might be. And I am concerned, just as a citizen, that our First Amendment rights and our Second Amendment rights are under assault. A gun never got up off of a table and walked over and ever shot anyone. Just like drugs never got into their system by themselves. Drugs are illegal. Most of these drugs that we have a problem with, they're illegal, but they're all over the place because criminals are going to continue to get what they want. Criminals will continue to get guns. Criminals will continue to kill people with guns. Your honest citizens are the ones that will suffer. We always suffer when we have make these kinds of sacrifices. So the grandmother and the grandfather or the single mother that's trying to protect herself or protect their family, it's used as a defense, and in many cases an offense. And guns are not the problem, in my opinion. And that's just my humble opinion. But I do think that there's a concerted effort in this country to remove the guns. So I must oppose any effort that I see in trying to remove the guns from our country. I'm for your bill in the respect that you're trying to make your community a safer place. But when you use the language, gun violence, gun violence, gun violence, it's violence with the use of a gun as well as it is violence with other things. And when you bring in, and I want to ask this question, is there still any part of your bill that involves the health department?
Can you repeat your last question one more time?
Is there any part of your bill that involves the health department?
Yes, if you look at the legislation, it's in 4-36101, the Department of Health should submit to the legislature in each municipality and county of the state an annual report on the public health impacts of gun violence on local communities. The report must include data on the deaths, disabilities, mental illness, and economic hardships stemming from gun violence. Additionally, the report must provide the public and policymakers with research-based information which should make informed decisions on how to best protect Tennesseans from gun violence. On top of the fact, I want to re-emphasize as a proud gun owner myself that this bill is not intended to take away anybody's guns. We even completely removed that line from the bill as requested from you all last week. I've done that. I've emphasized time and time again, this is not a bill to take away anybody's legal rights on guns. I'm a proud gun owner. I love my guns, but I also understand that I've had the proper training in circumstances where I understand the rules. I understand the impacts of having a gun. I know how to have conflict resolution skills, but unfortunately, many folks don't have those skills, abilities, or knowledge or training. So all we want to do is make sure those people who do have guns understand and have the capacity to use those correctly and own them correctly and have the education they need not to turn to violence by the use of guns. So I don't want us to get confused that this is a bill to take away or make it harder to get guns. There's not one line in this bill to say that we're trying to take away guns, make it hard for people to own guns, or any of those things. So I just, want to make sure that I emphasize that because we would love your vote and your support. And yes, there are individuals who themselves take guns and do bad things with them. And that is why this bill is so important, because it takes preventative measures so individuals won't take this tool and use wrong with them, as we're seeing what's happening in our communities all over the state.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you think the laws that we have that have banned drugs has worked?
I don't know if that's relevant to the bill.
It's not. It's just my point that we're trying to address something that will still cause criminals to do what they do because they break the law. And in my opinion, this bill is going to hurt honest, law-abiding citizens. And I must mention the fact that our forefathers never once mentioned any kind of special training or any kind of special laws. They said in the Second Amendment that we have the right to keep and bear arms, and this shall not be infringed upon. As far as the health department goes, I know during COVID that they shut down some companies. They have way too much authority, in my opinion now, and many of these agencies do. They shut a car company down that never had even one case of COVID. They shut them down. And the health department did that. And so when we start getting these departments involved in these kinds of actions, I think it's a dangerous road to go because we're abdicating our authority as the legislator over to a department that needs to be held in the hands of the legislatures. That's what we're for. We make the laws. We are the closest to the people. I represent 70,000 people, and the representatives are the closest to the people. And when you get these departments, they're many times not too close. So your intent is good, and I appreciate it very much, but I am afraid of this bill, so I'll be a no. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader Lambert.
Thank you. And I know there was some conversation a while ago about budget and everything, and as most of y'all know, I carry my budget book with me just about everywhere because on page B19 of your budget book, there's $150 million for violent crime intervention grants. And so I know we mentioned utilizing funds earlier to be able to address violent crime. There is no better way that I can imagine than investing this $150 million and more to ensure that folks are coming together and exactly that your intention is being met, and that all the departments are working together, both in your neighborhood and mine and everyone's. So I just wanted to mention that there is money in the budget, that if this proposed budget were to be adopted by the legislature, I hope that this money and these funds and others would be utilized to do exactly what you're attempting to do here, which is to get all those departments, law enforcement, everybody at the table, and I agree with what many have said already. The intent of what you're trying to do here is good. I think some of us are looking to make sure that there's action associated with that, and I know that's what you've said as well. I mean, you don't want folks just to generate another report. You want to make sure they're really doing what they've told all of us that they've been doing all along, that all these departments of state government are focused on this task. So just wanted to kind of throw it out there that as far as from a financial standpoint, if that particular line item remains in the budget, there are definitely funds here to be able to go directly at these violent crime issues. And I agree, it's an overall violent crime issue with a variety of weapons and backgrounds and reasons for that. And we ought to go at every single aspect of it. So just something to think about.
Thank you for your comments. I'm glad to know that there's money carved out to help with this issue. I will circle back and say that this bill costs nothing, and so far the budget hasn't been passed, so that money isn't guaranteed. But what we can guarantee now is a conversation will be held that costs us not a dime. And it isn't going to take away anybody's right to own guns. It's a very simple approach to help make preventative measures around gun violence issues. So again, I just wanted to say it costs not a dime, and we can't guarantee that money is going to fall down. Even if, I'm not privy to many of the at the table conversations, I would love to be invited. But this way, we will be able to ensure that something will be done. And it costs nothing. And it's very simple. And I've talked to all the departments to help me get this bill right.
both your opinion and every member of this legislature is critical to the discussion of the budget, and we have budget hearings for hours and hours and hours every single week. Please come and attend those. I mean, any member, please come and attend. If you have questions, let the member of that committee know. But for several months, we will go through analyzing this budget, and I want to be crystal clear, both you and every other member of this body is welcome into that process and needed in that process to ensure that these funds or any others are allocated in the way that your districts wish to be. So it's their money. It's taxpayer dollars. It doesn't belong to any one of us. So you absolutely have a seat at the table, as does every member.
Representative Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Lamar, for bringing this. I think we're getting a little too far astray of what this really does. There's no authority, I've read the bill, there's no authority granted to any department to take action other than to generate a report. And this report, we have reports on opioid abuse, we have reports on COVID, the county, statewide. We have reports on anything that affects the health of the people of the great state of Tennessee. Gun violence obviously affects the health of the people of the great state of Tennessee. I don't understand the resistance to your bill. There's no budget tag. You've worked with every department. Let's try something new. Let's try to bring the departments together. Let's try to get these reports. I understand that some of my colleagues are concerned that this gives somebody superpowers, which is not in the bill. It just gives the recommendation, and it says may instead of shall bring these reports forward. And I think it's got to start somewhere. And I really, really like the way that you've started. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you said that. I also want to, it doesn't mandate anything. You know, it gives them the opportunity to do this, which is, again, I think that everyone wants to start this conversation, which is why I work with so many of the departments to get this right. This is not a mandate. It's not requiring them to do it. It is allowing them if they so choose. So I do want to emphasize that.
Thank you. I will say that there are two sections where it does mandate the Department of Health and the TBI. And, well, there's a third, and the Department of Education.
Okay.
For clarification purposes. Representative Griffey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative, for bringing this. I don't know if you might be willing to roll this a couple of weeks and let us kick it around with some of us. Honestly, I think the best approach would be let's get a committee appointed by, say, the speaker, the governor, and who's ever in it. Let's pick a district who's got the most problems with this issue, and let's try to address it. And let's spend some money on some of that grant money that we already in the budget, and do a pilot project. No strings attached on it. To come up with the best thing, and if you can come up with some good solutions, we can use those solutions in other places in Tennessee. So I don't know if you might agree to roll this a couple of weeks and talk about that.
Chairman Moody.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, just echoing what's been said about the need, but I'm not here to officially speak for the educators, but just being on the committee, our teachers feel overloaded with not being able to do what we're asking them to do, and we keep piling on with our teachers, and I'm concerned about that. And with the Department of Health, and not on this bill at all, but I'm concerned with the Department of Health, and not necessarily specifically our state, but to see how we get on a slippery slope with these things that seem so innocent and good in the beginning. But our veterans, and this is federal, our veterans have to tell if they have a gun, and then if they has sought mental health, they will take their guns from them. it just, so this is, I've seen red flags all over the place. I'm not saying that's your intent, but just these few things are enough for me to be a no vote for this bill. And I do appreciate all your work. But those, and the one other thing, with the part with the health care, in the emergency rooms, I've not had to experience it, but everything I'm hearing from them, they can't keep up with what they're getting that are physical emergencies. And so again, kind of like with the teachers, we're piling on more with these folks that are stretched to exhaustion. And I just have concerns with what we're adding on to those folks. But thank you for bringing attention to this. Thank you.
One more.
Thank you. I will say that I don't think we're overloading them, because oftentimes teachers are the ones that are breakup fights. They're the ones that the first people to talk to a kid before they go out and commit some violence. They're the ones that see some of the most violent behavior in their classrooms. I mean, we just passed a bill last year where once every 3 years, our teachers got to take human trafficking training. They got to provide all of these things. And if anything, our teachers teaching conflict resolution training is one of the best ways in order to de-escalate crime and violence within our youth. Sometimes we have to make sure that we are putting in the right training and opportunities for individuals to stop gun violence before it happens. And with children spending 8 hours of the day in school, that's the best way to bring it to the classroom.
Well, and that brings up another concern I brought earlier last week when you brought in the pastor and, is there some way we could, since everything we deal with seems like it goes back to the breakdown of the family. And these kind of things, that's where this should be taken care of. And I know we don't live in a perfect world, so we're looking for answers for those children that it's not their fault that their parents are disengaged. But I just see again, and I'm going to bring it up again, these games that these kids are addicted to are so awful. And the music and the lyrics that they are listening to are promoting it. And what we're trying to fix here. And so I think about, a lot of times we don't even consider what role the faith community could play with these children. And I guess we get squeamish with, church and state, the state requiring the church to do that. But I think we have lots of churches that would love to take part in helping in these communities, right there in their own communities. It wouldn't require them having to go far away. There's so many other things leading up to this that we haven't even talked about. And so I just offer that as a thought.
Thank you for your comments. I was always told that faith without works is dead. And if we truly believe in the principles of God, God delivered all people despite what their family looks like, despite what their community looks like, despite what the opportunities they have. And with this bill, it's putting works to our faith. We have faith that we want to get our family units together, that we want to improve these outcomes, but we have to actually show and do things to do that. And so this bill is the works that we're trying to put in. We're trying to put in very zero cost interdepartmental measures to help prevent those things from happening. Yes, we would love for all our families to come from a two-parent household and our children not to be able to be exposed to violence, but that's just not our reality. And as state representatives, we all took that oath to care about all people, no matter what their family outcome looks like. And so it is our job to use our agencies and our departments to make sure we're taking care of people. And so, again, no community is perfect, no family is perfect, and we know children just don't get those resources because of that. And so we have to take it upon ourselves in the roles that we sign up to serve in, such as teachers, state representatives, law enforcement, all other roles, to do the work to keep everybody safe. Because, again, if everybody was going to do the right thing, we wouldn't have agencies, law enforcement, jail, and all these other different departments to help create a apparatus in our society where it can operate effectively and efficiently. So I would say it is the act of God that we do things like this to help prevent more of his children from dying in the streets. Just like we've seen with the family that testified today, just as we've seen about the 4-year-old that got shot, the 14-year-old who got shot in the neck in Nashville a couple of weeks ago, and all the other gun deaths that we hear every day. We have to take preventative measures. We can't just rely on faith alone to solve this gun violence issue. Then we're going to keep trying to solve a gun violence issue if we don't do anything about it. And I've come up with a great approach to do that.
I hear and agree with some of what you're saying. The question is, with the breakdown of the family and those things, the faith community does have the answer. And so, yes, agencies and the state can play a role, but they're not the answer. And it comes all back to that community. And I think, like I said, if it was offered through our churches and the communities, and what government, I'm uncomfortable with government being the answer to everything. And when we know where the answer can come from, and when these children, adults, whoever needs it, could go to the church for help in this area, then that might open the door for them to get other help with family issues and things like that. And like I said, I'm uncomfortable with government being the answer, but we can certainly get out of the way that would help community resources be more accessible and helpful. But anyway, again.
I appreciate that, Chairlene. As a proud Christian, I understand that, you know, the church is a vehicle that we use to help with a lot of community issues. But I just had a pastor and clergy come up here last week to tell y'all that it's too much for the church to handle alone, and they need your help. And they just testifying from this whole committee saying that the church can do is at its capacity. Can you join me in this fight in order to solve these issues in our community? And so the churches are asking for this support as well.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to monopolize, and thank you. I'm enjoying it, and thank you. You know, I think too, it would be good, you know, for us to take this message back to the churches. I mean, we're from all over the state, and engage, you know, more churches into doing it, because it's a monumental task. And so, you know, I'll be happy to take it back to my church and work. We do a lot of work in the Memphis area, and I know that's a hotbed of what we're talking about. So, but it's everywhere, and so I'll be happy to go back to my church and say, let's make sure we're involved, engaged in this too. But thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, Representative Griffey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move we roll this bill 2 weeks to try to give it thing. If not, I can't support it as is. But I want to try to give the sponsor. I could agree to a pilot program. If we're not going to do that, I think we ought to summer study it. So.
Just kill it if y'all not gonna vote for it.
2-week roll.
Keeping me rolling.
The 2-week roll is the motion. Any objection to that? That objection rolled 2 weeks. Next item, House Bill 2271.
Motion.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, members of committee. London, are you coming by? Okay, wait a minute. Sorry. You can stay. You can stay. That's a reasonable accommodation, by the way. All right, we'll start again. Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. This bill expands criminal asset forfeiture. We've had lots of discussion today about violence in some of our communities. Right now, we take the assets of those who traffic drugs and those who traffic some of our youth, but this bill would expand the criminal asset forfeiture to aggravated rape of a child, aggravated rape, and as well as the, I call this the GA amendment, community terrorism we've added as well. That's the piece of legislation. With that, I'll take any questions from the committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none, we're now voting on sending House Bill 2271 on to full criminal. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the ayes prevail. You move on to full criminal.
Thank you, Chairman.
Item number 9, House Bill 2087 by Chairman White. See you in the room. Roll one spot. Item number 10, House Bill 1944 by Chairman Sapicki. Is Chairman Sapicki in the room? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just while we're waiting and filibuster a little bit, I have two constituents in the room. I just want to welcome Miss Angela Redden and Miss Jasmine Brand to Nashville. So thank you for coming, ladies.
Thank you for being with us today. Members, we have roughly 26, 27 minutes left in this committee today. We've had several folks that have come quite a distance that would have expressed interest in testifying on this bill. We have them on our list. You are recognized properly on your bill. If you would like, there's also an amendment. I don't know if the amendment makes the bill or not.
Mr. Chairman, I will,
Yes, sir.
I'll be requesting a roll call on every vote taken on this bill moving forward.
Thank you. The sponsor is requesting a roll call vote.
And I do have amendment. I'll be working off amendment 013752.
Mayor, you're recognized on the amendment.
It does make the bill, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to add it to the bill.
Would you like to give a brief explanation of the
Absolutely.
amendment?
What it does is it creates a process. First of all, we all know the turmoil that's been expressed across the state of Tennessee in regards to material that has found its way into our classrooms and into our libraries. So I'll break it down very quickly. The first section, Mr. Chairman and committee members, currently there is an exception in Tennessee code to exempt the K-12 system for any possession of obscene or pornographic materials in their possession in our K-12 system. It removes that exception. Section 2, though, if there's something that's controversial, it creates a skeletal process. That's all it does. It's not a detailed process. It's a skeletal process that would, if a complaint is made in the school system, it talks about how a process will take place to make sure, and I want everybody to hear me on this, to make sure that we do not arbitrarily remove any book from a school system. It has to go through a process. And Supreme Court law talked about community standards and what a reasonable person would deem obscene or pornographic. The bill rests that decision at the local level with the school board. The school board, who are the elected members of a community who should expound the community standards and what reasonable people would deem objectionable. And then that decision, in its finality, is made by the school board. And if it is deemed objectionable or at grade level inappropriate, it would be removed from circulation, or that material would be removed from the classroom. If it's deemed to be not, based off of those community standards, at 147 different, based off the skeletal process established, then it would go back into circulation. It also creates, which is a little bit different from another bill that ran yesterday, it creates a process of reporting to the state of any book that is removed, so we can track that at the state level to monitor that. And it also creates an enforcement mechanism at the Department of Education to make sure that these LEAs have enacted something to take care of this at the local level. Now, some people have asked me, well, why is that needed? Well, we just passed a bill with critical race theory, but there was no enforcement mechanism in it. And that enforcement mechanism got diluted through the bureaucratic process. All this does is lay out a process, brings accountability to the school boards. Local community standards will make that decision. I know we're very pressed for time, Mr. Chairman. If it's okay, I'd rather have the testimony of the people who came here to speak to you today.
All right. Without objection, we will go out of session to hear from, we have a list here. First on our list is Angela Redden. Please forgive me if I mispronounce any names today. It's not my intent. But I do have a history of not being able to pronounce the last name. You will have 4 minutes. If you would, introduce yourself. You'll have 4 minutes of comments and then opportunity for questions from the committee.
Thank you, Representative Doggett. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. You pronounced mine properly, so we're good. We're good on names. Thank you, Representative Doggett and members of the Criminal Justice Subcommittee for allowing me to address you today. My name is Angela Redden. I'm an independent bookstore owner in Dixon, but prior to becoming a bookstore owner, I spent over 17 years as a teacher in Tennessee. I still have friends who are teachers and librarians, not only in Dixon, but across our beautiful state. I know firsthand the power of literature. Books are for everyone. And on behalf of my former colleagues, current and future teachers, librarians, booksellers, and readers alike, I'm here to speak to you today about House Bill 1944 and urge you to vote against it. First and foremost, this bill is a clear violation of our First Amendment. The Miller test currently stands as a legal precedent for determining obscene materials, and it is already written into Tennessee Code. Removing the ability of educators to apply the Miller test would be a signal to our communities that we do not trust our teachers and librarians, those trained professionals who have dedicated their lives to educate, protect, and prepare our children for the future. How can we expect our children and our children's children to grow up to be patriots if we do not teach them how to properly stand up for their First Amendment right? Furthermore, under the existing Tennessee Code, it is already illegal to distribute materials harmful to minors. We have a system in place, and it works. This bill would only restrict the ability to access educational materials and allow each of the 31 judicial districts in the state to individually define what obscene means to them. This overreach could allow for incredibly restrictive censorship, and depending on who's making that determination, could allow for subversion of the intended use of this bill. We have no time for unconstitutional, big government overreach here in the state of Tennessee. Tennessee currently ranks near the bottom for public education. To change this, each classroom needs to be a community where children, teachers, and parents work together to learn about the world around them. And in order for students to grow, that learning must include challenging, tough topics that need to be untangled and discussed with parents and teachers at school and at home. Ultimately, the decision on what should be read and discussed in our classrooms should be made by students, parents, and teachers working together. How can we expect our children to become well-equipped, productive members of society if we do not introduce them to different perspectives in supportive environments so that they can develop necessary skills to succeed in a challenging and diverse world? Our nation was built on the concept of freedom, a concept we all as Americans hold above all else. Without freedom, how can we meet the challenges of a changing world? That freedom is just as critical for the students who live.
I apologize, Ms. Redden. You're out of time. I am sorry about that. Push your button and continue, yes.
That freedom is just as critical for the students who lead America in the years ahead as it is for the legislators who lead our great country today. We must fight to defend it. I sincerely hope you all decide to stand with the teachers, parents, and guardians and children in your communities and vote no. Thank you for your time and for that extra time.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Representative Hardaway, we have several want to testify today, but if you've got a question you would like to raise?
Just one for the speaker,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman. And I didn't hear it. You may have covered it in your presentation, but when you, in your own terms, define obscene material, what does it look like?
I think obscene materials is defined differently for every individual student. And our teachers and librarians have trained to be able to make those decisions. I can tell you as an 8th grade teacher, I always had a classroom library, and I always had books in it that I knew some of my students needed to read and some of them didn't. I didn't have a colleague that didn't understand that same understanding of the word obscene. Obscene to a child living in a home with a single parent, with drugs all around them, with violence around them, is going to be totally different than obscene to a child living in a family, as Representative Moody discussed earlier, that hasn't suffered the breakdown of the family. So obscenity is different for different people. And we can't take that ability for our professionals who have gone to school, who know how to make those decisions. Are there teachers who make bad decisions? Absolutely. There are legislators who make bad decisions too. We're all human. We all make bad decisions. Government does not need to be involved in those classroom decisions. The parents need to talk to the teachers. The parents need to talk to the children. The children, the parents, and the teachers need to be the ones who decide what is too obscene for them to read.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Representative Beck.
Thank you. 2 quick questions. First of all, are there any books in schools and libraries that can't be purchased at your bookstore or other bookstores?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
In other words, if it's in the schools or not in the schools, it's also available at your store or other stores.
Possibly. I mean, each independent bookstore owner is going to curate their collection, or it's not a collection, their merchandise according to their customer base. So are there books available that aren't in libraries? Absolutely. Are there citizens who can't afford to buy them? Absolutely. That's why libraries are important.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our list is a Kristen Benton. If you would identify yourself on the record. Yes, sir. Absolutely. We have, Ms. Benton, we have one question for the last witness. Ms. Redden.
Yeah. And I apologize, Mr. Chair, for that. I just had one quick question here for her. So, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
You have a bookstore in Dixon,
I do.
Tennessee? And how long have you had that bookstore?
I've had it for a little over 3 years now. The bookstore has been there for 13 years. I purchased it, my husband and I purchased it 3 years ago.
Okay. Do you carry obscene material in your bookstore?
You probably would think I do.
Oh, have we met?
If you're asking me that question, there are probably things in the bookstore that you would think are obscene. I don't know what your definition of obscene is.
Okay. And I'll take that as a yes. Thank you so much.
Chairman Curcio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to thank Ms. Redden for being here. She and I have known each other my entire life, our entire lives, and her bookstore is an excellent addition to Main Street in Dixon, and I just want to appreciate you coming out here and involving yourself in this process today. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Representative Curcio, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Representative Sexton, you had, I'm sorry, ma'am, there was one more that had a comment or question for you. I know we're playing this up and down game, and I'm sorry. After this one, just hang tight, and we'll make sure there's nobody else that wants to ask you a question. I'm sorry.
And I apologize also. I'm not an educator. I've never been involved in education, even though I was on the education committee for a couple of years. So there's a lot in education that I don't know about. I do know about raising a family, and I do know about how important it is. Words mean a lot. Literature means a lot. And I think the protection of our children is very important. And you made a statement, and I do not mean this with any disrespect to you, but you said that you talked about trusting you and trusting teachers. And just recently, I've looked at some of the literature, and I'm appalled. And if you're allowing, or any teacher or any librarian is allowing stuff like this in, no, I do not trust you. And I do not trust the teachers. Thank you.
Am I allowed to ask him a question?
You are allowed to respond, yes, ma'am.
Representative Sexton, I have not read that book. Would you mind telling me what it includes that you think would not be appropriate in a high school library? Or are we talking school libraries or any library?
I'll be glad to read you what is in here, but it's very obscene, and so I don't know whether the committee would allow that or not.
I did not ask you to read it.
I thought you did. I'm sorry. I thought you did.
I asked what subject matter it was. You are correct, and I understand your fear. I have 3 children. I've raised 3 children in the beautiful state of Tennessee. And there are books, that's probably one of them, that I would not have my 13-year-old read.
5th grade. 5th grade.
You had a teacher requiring students to read that book?
I did not have a teacher requiring students to read this book. I was given this book that was in the school library.
So it's in a school library with 5th graders. That is a concern. However, have you gone to that librarian and gone through the process that's currently in place to have it removed from the library?
Miss, pornography like this, I'm not on trial here.
Neither am I.
Pornography like this does not belong in our schools, period. It doesn't belong in high school. It doesn't belong in elementary school. When you're talking about private acts that are going on with teenagers and graphics that, and in some cases, they even have photos showing you how to do it.
I, again, understand your fear. I do. But there are also books that other people are going to find obscene, that are going to, you're going to open up the ability for them to remove those books from your libraries and your classrooms with this bill.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Next up, we have Ms. Kristen Benton, I have been told by the clerk's office we are going to be able to extend our time a little bit here in this committee today, but you will have 4 minutes for your testimony and then availability for questions.
Thank you, Chairman, representatives. My name is Kristen Benton, and I am the mom of 2 daughters that attend Williamson County schools. One of them's here today. Last year, I began hearing about pornographic materials in school libraries across the country. And like any parent who takes their role seriously, I needed to know if the schools that I trust my children with every day contained these same obscenities. Books whose content serves no educational purpose and in any other setting are clear-cut violations of Title 39. So I went to work researching books that meet Title 39 definitions of obscenity. I combed through school card catalogs, and title after title kept showing up in our school libraries. I was in shock. How could our schools, in good conscience, be okay with this? I realized there are only 2 answers to that question. Either they don't know or they don't care. Assuming innocent intent, I gathered parent volunteers to bring awareness to the school board, and at the November meeting, 6 parents, including myself, read excerpts from books that exist in multiple libraries in Williamson County schools and across the state. What we read was deemed so obscene that they muted the live feed online so those watching at home could not hear what we read. I submitted a handout prior to this morning that each of you should have. It's the same handout that I provided to the school board and contains the text that we read aloud, as well as other titles containing obscenity in school libraries throughout the state. As you review the handout, consider this. Notorious serial killer Ted Bundy said that pornography played a key role in his violence, that it fueled his fantasy life. In his final interview, he cautioned about the danger of pornography and graphic violence and how it can impact, quote, unattended and unaware children that have vulnerabilities to become a Ted Bundy, end quote. Even one of the most violent serial killers of all time cautioned against exposure to pornography and its role in fostering depravity. Yet, school districts across this state are making obscene content available to those most vulnerable to its influence and corruption. This isn't about banning books, and it goes beyond the loss of innocence. It's about being mindful of what is fed to impressionable young minds. After the board meeting, I was optimistic. Surely now that they are aware and they deemed the books obscene enough to mute the live feed, they would consider how their 15 or 16-year-old self would be impacted reading these same words and would take quick action to remove these books from the libraries. Not so. It's been 3 months, and the district has made no effort to investigate the book titles that I provided them, and further said that parents must pursue a very tedious and very lengthy 4403 textbook review process for an opportunity to have titles in libraries reviewed. Again, we're talking about library books, a problem that could be solved with a simple emailed directive to all the district's librarians. Yet they're taking no responsibility or initiative to protect our children. This is why HB 1944 is so important. You have the opportunity to place guardrails that protect our children in the setting where parents most trust them to be safe and protected, their school. You have the opportunity to prevent and hold schools accountable for breaking the laws that protect the most innocent and precious of our population, our children. On behalf of the parents of children across this great state of Tennessee, I ask you to please vote yes on HB 1944.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions for our Mr. Beck?
Thank you, Chairman. Oh, can you give me some of those titles that you brought up that were in all these different schools, please?
Yes, and I did submit a handout to Emily that she can get to you that has a number of them. One of them, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, The Glass Castle, Reckless, there are countless of them. I actually have a whole website where I've been cataloging these and have a list of many hundreds of books that there's a group of parents of us that are pouring through to understand what's in the libraries, actually in our libraries, and then what's in the books as well. So I would reference the handout that I submitted.
Those were emailed to you, all that information, the books that she's referenced here, she just said was emailed to you.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You talked about the innocence of our children. Are we doing anything about what they can find on our phones?
Well,
I
they
mean, talk about pornography. I mean, it's there and it's accessible. I'm thrilled to see a child read a book, but apparently we got a problem. You think we have a problem here? So tell me what we're doing about the phones.
So the issue is what's in the school libraries and what the schools are providing to children. The school's not responsible for what parents at home are doing. Parents get to make the choice for their children at home. But in the schools, where the government essentially has access to our children, the government should be taking measures, putting guardrails in place to keep our children safe and protected.
And I've received a lot of emails on concerning this from librarians who have apparently it's, which I didn't know, you have to have a master's degree to be a librarian these days, which is a wonderful thing, educated people. But my question is, several of them referred to the Miller test as to what is obscene and what is not. Going into library, are you familiar with that? Because I'm not.
Vaguely familiar. I guess I would point to current existing language in Title 39. And if you would take a look at the handout I sent, and if you feel comfortable reading it aloud at a Thanksgiving gathering, then your family's different than mine. But I would say that those texts are not for respectable company. You wouldn't read them out loud in a coffee shop. You wouldn't read them at a Thanksgiving gathering. And that certainly meets the community standard definition in Title 39 of obscenity. So I would be happy to talk with you some other time, but I really do think that looking through the handout that I provided, which includes excerpts, images from the pages of these books, will help shed a lot of light on what we're talking about.
And finally, the librarians express that there's already a process that if a parent is concerned about a book that's in the library, they can ask the librarian to remove it, and then there's a process that follows that. Are you familiar with that process?
I'm familiar with that process. It's the 4403 process. It's a very lengthy process. It's multiple pages per book, and so that means that then one book might be available in one county and not in another, in one school and not in another. Just because one parent undertakes that process for one school doesn't mean then that that book is appropriate in another school. If the book is inappropriate and deemed so by one school, it should be inappropriate across the board for all of the children. Also, I would say that that in any other circumstance, right, Title 39 and the definition of obscenity, right now, these current books would violate Title 39. But for some reason, in a school library setting, it's been carved out. So if these books are obscene as defined by Title 39, in any other setting, it should also apply in our school libraries of all places.
Mr. Chairman, in your email, and I apologize, I haven't seen, do you have an example of how that process is supposed to work?
I can send you what that process is. Again, it's a very lengthy process, multiple pages of, it's very, very tedious. Submitting what the title is, the pages, samples of it. And we've actually just undergone this process in Williamson County for some books, and it took them, I think, something like 6 or 7 months. And during that process, those books were still available. So the process itself is very flawed. And again, I just come back to, if something is obscene under Title 39 in any other setting, it should also be obscene in our school libraries.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, witness.
Thank you. Representative Hardaway, did you have a brief question?
Yes, sir. Very brief. First, I appreciate you as well as the other presenters on making yourselves available to the committee and the work you do to protect our children and to protect our First Amendment rights. Are there, your interpretation of where this bill takes us, will there still remain exceptions for the material that's deemed to have value, whether it's scientific or otherwise?
Yes, and I think that there will be, yes. There are millions of books available that have educational value that don't contain obscenity, and those books are absolutely perfectly wonderful to use. It makes no rational sense to me that we would provide obscene materials in an educational setting when there's no other educational value present in those books. I would also say that our current public libraries, those books could be available there, which is outside the purview of the schools. I can choose to take my children to that library. I can choose what books they check out or don't, but I don't have that same oversight when they're in their school setting. And many libraries in Tennessee, in fact, have a section of mature books that I think we would find these in. And we're not allowed to do that in our school libraries. They don't want that for whatever reason it is, but it does exist in our public libraries.
So are you suggesting that a compromise might be that the books in school libraries are sectioned or cordoned off or somehow restricted as in the public libraries?
I have very mixed feelings about that. I think if there are books that appear in a mature section in a library, they probably shouldn't belong in a school setting.
Last question, Mr. Chairman. The same willingness that you express for interpreting and helping your children to understand material in the public libraries, I would venture to suggest to you that some children don't have the opportunity to access public libraries, either because of transportation or their parents are working 1,000 hours a week or for other reasons. So their opportunity to access material and to have it interpreted and have assistance in how to interpret it would depend upon what's in the school library. So I'll only suggest that the school libraries sometimes are the only library that some children are going to have access to, and the only opportunity that some parents or other trusted adults would have an opportunity to help the child to interpret that material. So I thank you for your work.
Yes, I fully agree, and that is why the guardrails need to be in place in our schools for the families just like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on our list will be Mr. John Rich that we have here. If you would introduce yourself for the record, and you will have 4 minutes to provide testimony.
Thank you. I'm John Rich. I'm here in my capacity as a dad, which is my most important job. There are good people in our legislature on both sides of the aisle who want to fix the problem of our children being exposed to obscene and pornographic material at school. However, some have argued that this material is approved because it falls under the definition of education, in their opinion. I will prove to you today how that statement is false. We are here today because our rogue schools, teachers, and school boards that are allowing our children to be exposed to materials that assault their innocence and conscience every day, even at this very minute. Not only is it repugnant and evil to expose our kids to graphic sexual images and narratives, it also happens to be illegal on a state and federal level. Today I'm going to focus on just one of the reasons why it has been deemed to be illegal to expose kids to these materials. That reason is an official and legally recognized term used to define the tactics of child predators when they are in pursuit of a child. It is known as grooming. The American Bar Association outlines grooming tactics predators may use during the grooming process to include, number one, discussing sexually explicit information under the guise of education. American Bar Association. Number two, showing the child sexually explicit images or narratives. Under the Federal Coroners and Justice Act of 2009, Sections 62 through 68, it was made a criminal offense to be in possession of prohibited images of children, including cartoons, drawings, or computer-generated images. This is defined closely to require that the image is grossly offensive and obscene and pornographic. The two main justifications given by the federal government for criminalizing the possession of these prohibited images was that they could be used for grooming children and could fuel child abuse by reinforcing potential abusers' inappropriate feelings towards the children. The federal enticement statute section of 2422 of the United States Criminal Code. The statute targets the sexual grooming of minors. The statute's focus is on the intended effect on the minor rather than the defendant's intent to engage in sexual activity. In the case of the United States versus Chambers, defendant Chambers was convicted of violating the federal enticement statute. The Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals noted that child sexual abuse can be accomplished by several means and is often carried out through a period of grooming. The court recognized that grooming refers to deliberate actions taken by a defendant to expose a child to sexual material, and that the ultimate goal of grooming is to reduce the child's inhibitions, to prepare the child for sexual activity. Furthermore, in U.S. Criminal Code 1466A, it states, in general, any person who knowingly produces, distributes, receives, or possesses with intent to distribute a visual depiction of any kind, including a drawing, cartoon, sculpture, or painting that depicts a minor engaging in sex or is obscene shall be subject to the felony penalties provided in Section 2252A. Note, it is not a required element under this section that the minor depicted actually exists or is a real person. What's the difference between a teacher or an educator or a librarian putting one of these books, like you have, on the desk of a student, or a guy in a white van pulling up at the edge of school when school lets out and saying, come on around, kids, let me read you this book and show you these pictures? What's the difference in those two scenarios? There is a difference, by the way. They can run away from the guy in the white van. Does anyone here have kids or grandkids? I'm assuming most do. Can you imagine if your kids or grandkids came to my home and I pulled out some of these books and I read them those stories and I showed them those pictures and they came back to your house? You're not going to believe what Mr. John read to me and showed me over at his house. What did Mr. John show you? And I get a phone call, hey, I want to see what you showed my kid, and I show him that. What do you think would happen to me at that point? I would be arrested, and as I should be arrested. I've heard talk of processes are in place to handle this. Yeah, processes without penalty. And processes without penalty are unenforceable. And that's why nothing's happening right now. Individuals and entities who decide it's okay to assault our children with pornographic images and storylines, I would bet that no one in this chamber wants to be on the record for allowing bona fide grooming to continue taking place in Tennessee schools. I'd bet on that one. I'd guess that no one wants to be known as someone standing in the way of legislation being passed that protects the innocent among us, our children, from being victimized by these illegal action. Governor Lee's language does not fix the problem. It says that teachers, boards, and administrators can still determine what is age appropriate or not, which is what the lady was saying prior to me, back. The reason we have a problem in the first place is because these teachers, boards, and administrators already think the materials are age appropriate. In effect, the current language as it was proposed and has been proposed holds no one any more accountable than they are today and leaves the parents with the only option they currently have, and that is to file civil and criminal charges against the perpetrators.
Mr. Rich, I'm sorry, we are beyond our 4
I got one
minutes.
last thing to say, please. Matthew 18:6, but if anyone causes one of these little ones to believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a millstone hung around his neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea. That's it.
Thank you very much. I think Leader Lambeth was going to request to give you some more time to speak
Thank
there.
you.
But any questions for our guest? Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you, sir. I'll try to see how long we've been in here. I appreciate your involvement, as I do the rest of the presenters. What I respectfully disagree with is the example that you use of the pervert or the pedophile pulling up outside of the school versus material that's made available in a library. that would be open to interpretation either way by a child. I'm not supporting putting porno or extreme obscene material in the hands of children, unsupervised, and without the benefit of a responsible adult assisting in the interpretation of the same. In other words, critical thinking. Critical thinking. That's what our children are in school for. And critical thinking sometimes requires exposure to information that you may not necessarily agree with, opinions you may not necessarily agree with. And I use that as an example, but in no way am I endorsing any of the specific material that you cited. I don't know those books. I haven't read them.
You should.
And no, sir, I don't have to, okay? I'm kind of like Justice Stewart. I don't have to be able to see the porno in order to know it. So I will read what I deem is necessary for me, okay? But those books are not what I'm discussing. I want to make that clear. But I am concerned that sensationalizing critical thinking will undermine the whole purpose of public education. So if you have a response to the efforts of our schools to instill critical thinking skills in our children, I'd be happy to hear that.
So to your first comment that you made, I would say if it's perverted for a pervert to say it to the kids on the edge of school, it is also perverted to say it in the classroom.
I don't even know what you're responding to.
Well, you haven't
so
read
if you'd be kind enough to respond to the question I asked.
Well, sure. That was a comment on your first comment. Yeah, I think critical thinking is absolutely critical. That's why we're all standing in this room to discuss if this is something we want our kids being exposed to or not. I guess the only way you could make a case for critical thinking to put what I would consider pedophilic material in front of children would be to teach the kids, hey, if anybody ever reads a story like this to you or shows you a picture like that, call the police. That would be critical thinking.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the order. I'm going to try to keep this focus once again, Mr. Ridge, on the principles and the skills that we want our children to learn in education. But if all that you're going to do is sensationalize it by getting back onto pedophile issues and porno and obscenity, then we're not going to have a fair exchange of ideas. Right? My concern is that we go too far in restricting our educators in their ability to instill in our children critical thinking skills. And that's what I was asking you to respond to. How do we balance the protections for our children against what the community would label as obscenity and pornographic material against critical thinking skills?
Right. I think what's interesting about this is that the books that have everybody so upset that do contain obscene material and pornographic material, those have already been deemed illegal in our state. They've been deemed illegal in the United States. I've cited case after case in law about that. What we're asking for are some type in this new legislation, some type of teeth in this, that not only is there a process in place to get the books out, but if you knowingly are harboring material like that is in violation of our current statutes in the state of Tennessee and federal, there should be some type of penalty. Procedure without penalty cannot be enforced. You know, if that was the case in driving too fast, they would say, hey, slow down every single time, right? But they don't say that. They give you a ticket at some point. You do it enough, they take your driver's license away. There is no penalty in place to deal with this. And because of the exception that he noted that's currently on the books that allows this under the guise of education. If you remember in the beginning of what I said, that even the American Bar Association says part of the grooming process is to show kids these types of images and narratives under the guise of education. This has been addressed in places all the way at the top of the food chain in our country, over and over and over. It's established what that is. I believe that people have hijacked the law. I believe they've hijacked the elbow room they were given to have critical thinking. I absolutely believe in critical thinking and teaching our kids to think critically. But I believe they've hijacked it, they've manipulated it, and they have gone outside the lines of what it was originally intended to be for. And as a cause of that, our children are being hurt.
Thank you, Mr. Rich. We're back on a rational discussion now, and I appreciate having you back. The opportunities for our children to learn these skills and the opportunities for our educators to instill these skills is what I'm most concerned about impugning. If we're going to be applying a blanket description and application on this material, and the description is just so loose, and the criminalization of librarians, and it's concerning to me. I think there's a balance that we have to find, and I'm sure the sponsor shares my concern about having balance in education. So Mr. Chairman, out of respect for the time, I'll reserve my further discussions on this for the sponsor.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much. We are out of time. All right, we'll go back into session. Thank you, Representative Sapicki. You want to make a statement here?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you can see, this is a very, very topic that we need to discuss further here. To be respectful of everybody that still wants to present before this committee, I would like to ask that we roll this 1 week and be first on the agenda so we can continue this discussion.
It's a proper motion. Will be rolled 1 week. All remaining bills on the calendar be rolled to next week's calendar. We will be adjourned. Thank you to all that came to testify today. I appreciate your time, and for those that were with us.